What did Jesus mean by green wood and dry wood on the road to Calvary? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Luke on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke 23. We're going to be reading from verses 26 to 33. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Luke 23, beginning of verse 26. Now as they led him away, they laid hold of a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, who was coming from the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And a great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming, in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry? There were also two others, criminals, led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right hand, and the other on the left. Pilate has now convicted Jesus to death by crucifixion. Jesus has done nothing worthy of death. Pilate admitted that. However, Pilate wanted to avoid a mob, so he cowardly acceded to their wishes and convicted Jesus and then handed him over to be crucified. Luke leaves out the part where the Roman soldiers strip him of his robe, place a scarlet robe on him and a crown of thorns on his head, and mock him. I don't know why Luke left this out, but the other Gospels contain it, so we know what happened. All Luke tells us is that they led him away to be crucified. Along the way, Jesus couldn't bear his cross anymore, for he was weak, so they compelled Simon of Cyrene to do so. Now, most movies depict Jesus or Simon bearing the whole cross from Jerusalem to Calvary. The cross would be the vertical and horizontal beam. In truth, this would not be the case. Remember, crucifixion was common in the Roman Empire. Therefore, sites of crucifixion would also be common. In actuality, the vertical piece of wood was permanently placed in the ground firm, so that it wouldn't fall over. The horizontal piece, after the person's hands were nailed to it, would then be affixed to the vertical piece to form a capital-looking T or cross, rather than the traditional lowercase t. The person's feet would then be nailed to the vertical piece, and the crucifixion would take place. So, what Simon would be bearing was only the horizontal piece, which would have been heavy enough. Along the way, Luke is the only one who records a conversation that Jesus has with some of the women on the road to Calvary. Mark 15:25 had Jesus on the cross by 9 a.m., so this conversation occurred before that time. Where had these women who lamented Jesus been before the trial? Why hadn't they been there to speak up for Jesus? Remember, Jesus was arrested away from the crowds in the middle of the night. He was tried and convicted by the Jews before most people had woken up. He was before Pilate, before most people were probably out in the city. So by now, these people had seen what had happened, but since there was nothing they could do about it, they broke out in tears and lamented. Jesus told them that their tears were misplaced. They were weeping for him when his death was absolutely necessary for the salvation of mankind. What they should be weeping for was the spiritual condition of Jerusalem, for her disobedience of God would lead to its destruction not many years from then. He told them that they should really be praying and lamenting for those who had children or were nursing in the days of Jerusalem's destruction, for they would truly be facing life and death trying to escape. Those people would be crying for the mountains to fall on them, for their fate would certainly have been better than the death at the Romans' army. Jesus tells these women that if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry? There have been many interpretations as to what Jesus meant here, but in the Old Testament, in places like Psalms 1 verse 3 and Ezekiel 20 verse 47, green wood or green trees are often associated with righteousness, and dry wood or dry trees associated with wickedness. In the context of Luke 23 then, Jesus is saying, look what they're doing to me, a righteous person, a green wood in times of peace. They're crucifying me. He, I believe, is referring to the Romans, for they are the ones in charge of the crucifixion. What then will the Romans do to those they perceive of as wicked in times of war? During the destruction of Jerusalem, the Romans were vicious to those who remained in Jerusalem. Thousands died gruesome deaths. Jesus' death would be terrible to endure, yes, but at least it had a purpose, and at least he was righteous. Those who remained in Jerusalem were those who didn't heed Jesus' warnings to flee. They would suffer a much worse outcome, for if they weren't faithful to God, their deaths would result in facing the judgment outside of God's grace, which would mean that they would receive eternal damnation in hell. So even on the road to death, Jesus was again warning the people to obey God now while they could. Along with Jesus, there were two other criminals who were going to be put to death with Jesus. The place where Jesus was crucified was called Calvary. Matthew, Mark, and John call it Golgotha, showing us that it had more than one name, or perhaps that name was translated into a different language, much like Joseph translates into Spanish as Jose. It is interesting that even though most of our hymns refer to Jesus dying on Calvary, this is the only time in Scripture that it is called this. Perhaps that is because Calvary is more poetic sounding than Golgotha or Place of the Skull in our songs. It is at Calvary that Jesus and the criminals were crucified. We'll continue with the story, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. We hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Luke chapter 23, verses 34 to 43, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.